socialist idea, but obviously, like, I have my questions with it. I'm equally as critical as I am like for it.
That makes sense.
Ideally, we're expected to all be like good humans, but when that's not the case, which is more the case than normal, like, that's where I have my issues.
Yep. Oh yeah, it wasn't exactly the first series of thoughts that came to mind with the whole anarcho-capitalism thing. I mean, I used to be a communist, like real, like Trotskyite Marxist, like,
Yeah.
and that was, I had a kind of malleable understanding of the human experience. So I was like, oh, well, we can just change humans to be whatever we want them to be if we like control the culture and stuff, and we can trick people into being good people, basically. And then over time, I've learned that that's not the case. And coming to those realizations and learning the way that the world actually operates kind of just eliminated every other option in my mind down to, okay, well, I guess, this Austro-libertarian anarcho-capitalism thing is basically just, this is already the way the world works. People just don't know it yet. So that's kind of how I got to where I'm at now.
Yeah. So how's you're in Colorado, right?
Yep.
How's that going? You're like at the liberal capital of the world, and not the good liberal kind.
Oh, man, it's infuriating. I was born and raised here, right? And when I was a kid, it was beginning that whole process. All the people were starting to move out of California and into Colorado and stuff. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And then, it's as well as self-fulfilling prophecies. The more lefty communists that move into Colorado, the more they vote for lefty communist garbage in the government, which attracts more lefty communists. It snowballs wildly out of control.
Yeah.
So I've just watched my entire hometown just go to shit, basically.
Yeah. So what's your idea then, as far as like, so one of my main questions was like, how do you control the goodness people in society? Like I was saying, like, I'm a big fan of like whippings and floggings because it's so cheap to do.
Yep.
And like, how do we do that without like a government idea? Like it's like we're all expected to be held to certain standards. For the most part, I think the Constitution is superfluous of human rights and whatnot. Like, we have to list them out.
Yeah.
But it affords us some pretty good freedoms overall.
Okay.
Like, I'm not going to encroach on your right to do this, and you're not going to encroach on mine.
Yeah. Right? It's basically it enumerates the categories of life in which you should be able to expect to be left alone. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I want to have a gun, and I don't want people to tell me I'm not allowed to. I say whatever I want to say, and I don't want people to beat me up for it. I want to, be secure from search and seizure, right? I don't want people just kicking in my door and taking my stuff, right? Like,
yeah. So it's kind of like, and I guess I get there's an economy for it, but it kind of falls back on like what I was saying about stop signs. Mm-hmm. Like, a stop sign is regulating my ability to continue driving, but it's good in that it allows like the efficient flow of things.
Right. This is actually one of the things that in the last couple of years, I figured I've been doing the anarcho whatever thing for like 5-6 years now. And only in the last couple of years is it kind of dawned on me that a lot of the stuff that the state does are normal market functions that they've kind of monopolized and then done a really shitty job of doing since they've monopolized it, right? Like, roads have existed before the government existed, and traffic norms existed before the government existed, but now everything's very codified and very straightforward, and stop means stop, go means go. If you don't do it, somebody's gonna steal from you, basically. Like, so like with the stop signs and stuff, I imagine that traffic regulation would be a market service in the unhampered market, right? You have, if I own a road, it makes sense that I would want to have efficient flow of traffic on my road. And basically, since it's my road, what I say goes. At the same time, all the other road owners in the region probably have a similar set of standards. You know, stop means stop, go means go, don't go too fast, don't go too slow, you know, drive on the right side of the road or the left, depending on where you are in the world, whatever. And it would make sense for my roads to interface well with everybody else's roads, so that you don't have to keep changing your idea about how to drive when you move from my road to somebody else's. So industry standards would naturally emerge, like USB does with computers. You know, it took it took something like 15, 20 years for us to figure out USB. But then once we figured it out, it's the most amazing piece of modern infrastructure we've got.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think roads and traffic regulation and stuff kind of follows the same progression.
So do you think it's kind of like a, because I got into a pretty frank discussion. It's actually at a Christian coffee shop, but she was a pretty liberal person, and I made the case against UPS versus, you know, FedEx and, you know, whatever, that private carriers do it better. So it's a better solution to start it governmentally and then like let it go, or is it to?
So this is one of those things where kind of a knowledge of trivial things about history comes in handy. There's a guy, his name's Lysander Spooner, which if you're talking about the Constitution and stuff, he's a fun guy to go to because he's written a lot about the Constitution. He was around in, oh boy, the late 1800s, early 1900s, I think, like the late 19th century. And he actually created a competitor to the recently monopolized post office service, right? They had just taken the Pony Express and everything, made it a government organization, did everything by the book, created the post office, and then he opened up a competitor. He basically opened up a UPS. And he was so good at it that the government actually shows up and says, you're not allowed to do that. You're out competing the post office, and shut him down. So then he started a publishing company and started writing all this anti-government propaganda because they came and shut down his business. So I mean, even back in the day, you know, letters were delivered before there was a federal post office, and then there were people that were able to outcompete the post office even in its initial stages. I mean, it's not that hard to package from point A to point B. You just have to figure out the logistics of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess the initial side was like you're paying somebody, you know, who you know is traveling over to like Gatlinburg.
Exactly.
Like I have a relative in Gatlinburg, find somebody who knows this person and, you know, deliver the letter. So then, I don't know, I guess that other point I brought up was like, so in a non-governmental world, like, how do you handle the hitmen who are coming to kill you? Because as it currently stands, I don't have the money to hire a security company, you know, like basically like, what do you call it? The president's personal security, you know?
Service. Yeah. So there's kind of three prongs to this dilemma that I think are each resolved by just praxeological principles. The easiest one to point out first is what stops the hitmen from getting you right now, right? As it
currently stands, I'm always of the opinion that that locks only keep honest people honest, really. You know, like look at Abe. You know, even the honest people would steal bikes.
Oh yeah, that was horrible. You never knew where any of your stuff was going to be unbolted. Like I lost 4 umbrellas and I just gave up on umbrellas, right? Yeah. Lexi, my wife, she forgot. She would leave her bike unlocked and then it would disappear for weeks at a time. And then one day it finally turned up with like no chain and the spokes were all rusted out. And it was like something in the ghetto, right? Somebody had stripped it for parts. Like it was bad. So, locks only keep honest people honest, and in the context of hitmen, you know, I'm not a big enough fish for somebody to want to hire. Actually, that's not true. My ex-girlfriend tried to hire somebody that actually knew me tangentially to hire me to hire me. She offered him like her savings account was like $6,000 or whatever, and she's like $6,000 cash if you get rid of this guy, and he's like, I know that guy. Like, so then he's like, just to let you know, like, well, that's interesting. We had a good laugh over it and went and got drunk and had a good time.
Yeah.
But so I guess even I'm not too small a fish to have a hitman hired. The thing is, so hitmen are expensive. So only wealthy people with a lot of investment in killing people would be able to hire a hitman to begin with.
But the market could, you know, if there's enough demand and enough supply, like theoretically, like hitmen could be very, you know, cheap.
Right. It is conceivable that you could have a high enough supply of hitmen and a low enough demand, you know, commensurately.
Yeah.
The price.
Well, I mean, they're expensive because they're you know, because it's outlawed.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why they're expensive. But if I can go to, you know, whatever, hitman for $100, I can provide that $100.
That's true. So that's definitely a fair, economically sound point. So then the other horn of the dilemma is there will always be a risk premium for things like hitmen, right? There's if I'm going to go kill somebody, I need to be sure that I can best them, right? Now, if I'm a hitman, I probably have the super spy gadgets with the night vision goggles and the silenced handguns and, you know, rope or whatever. And the guy I'm going after might be armed, he might not, but, you know, odds are I have more experience. But if there are private security firms that basically provide the same market function that police provide right now, things like that, that still includes, that still increases that risk factor that will price most people out of the market, right? If you're going into a job that's life or death, the supply of people willing to go into that field are minimal. Yeah. So the economically, it still kind of minimizes the supply, even if there's good money in it. There's good money in it for a reason, right? Even in the absence of the police. So underlying this discussion, it looks like we're kind of talking about general security issues, right? Because, you know, hitmen are one thing, or criminals of the more common sort are another thing, that they all try to undermine your security.
I guess security is like the underlying. Most rights I don't believe in. Like I said, I don't know if you're reading it, but like, you know, the Constitution says I have the right to bear arms, but I give up that right the second I enter an airplane. You know, I can't take my gun on with me with an airplane, and I get that's like a private, you know, entity. But if it's a right, then like you're inherently available to it.
Right.
So maybe I have a misunderstanding of rights, or I need it to be reevaluated for the circumstances.
Yeah. In the Slack channel, I was reading everything, but I was also playing Metroid Prime with my 4-year-old daughter, so I didn't have time to type. But I did send a link to a blog post I wrote. It's only 2,000 words, but it's about that very issue, where I actually think that rights as we conceive of them, especially as Americans, but just in general, even things like the right to life, from the Catholic angle, are an adoption of a philosophical idea that didn't exist prior to the 1700s. And that the church tying a lot of things into this rights language has limited the church's mobility in moral reasoning in a pagan world, basically. So I make the case that rights don't actually exist. That the things that
I'd almost make the same, but I just can't, like, I haven't made the jump yet over to, you know, like, I get it, rights don't exist. Like, I can't sit there and like hold up the Constitution and be like, you can't shoot me, it's my right to life. You know, that's the big thing I make against the Constitution, is that I can't hold it up and stop a gun, you know, a gun from killing.
Yeah,
you know?
That's actually the argument that I make for why contracts are bullshit, which is a fun thing to poke James with. But basically all I mean by that is the contract itself doesn't do anything, right? It's the people that use the contracts that do the things. The contract's just a piece of paper.
No, that's my same argument with the Constitution, though.
Exactly. And the Constitution's one generation divorced from contracts because it's not actually a contract, right? It's kind of an enumeration of ideas that a certain ruling class had about the people that they were going to rule, and the way it's like corporate bylaws, basically. It's not really a which is another thing that Lysander Spooner really got into when he started publishing anti-government stuff. So when it comes to things like right to life or right to bear arms or that kind of stuff, there's something that has always existed but has gone under different names throughout the history of philosophy. But the most modern iteration of that terminology is private property norms, right?
Yep.
And basically it's the idea that private property exists, right? There's no way around it.
Well, I can only, yeah. Right. Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I just turned off the video really quick.
That's fine. Yeah. I get the idea of private property, and there's only so much of it you can defend. Like, I remember you guys talking about that during the wedding, and that's kind of what sparked this whole idea. Because previously I was like a big constitutionalist. Like, these are my rights. This is like the greatest nation in the U.S. But in the end, like, I found like, yes, it's a great nation, but could we be better? Yes.
Yep, that's where those creepy, pernicious anarchist ideas start creeping into your head. Is I wonder if we could do better, right?
Yeah.
So I had something and I got distracted when my wife walked past in a towel. So yeah, with the private property thing, the underlying thing that I kind of really like to harp on and tends to get me in trouble with people that are a little more picky is the fact that you own yourself, right? If we define property as something that one has access to, control over, and the ability to exclude others, I would say that my body necessarily is my property, right?
Yep.
Even if I'm a strict materialist and I am my body, right? I am my brain, I am my heart, and that's the extent of it. There's still that relationship that exists from the self to the self, right? I own myself, I own my body. Then everything else that I own is an extension of that relationship, in that I own my cell phone because I have access to it, control over it, and the ability to exclude other people from it. And in the case of my cell phone, I've got a legitimate claim to it as well. I've paid for it. It's mine. So what we have then is a delineation between de facto ownership and what you could call market ownership or moral ownership, which is, de facto ownership. I could, punch you, take your wallet, and then I have access to it, control over it, and the ability to exclude people from it. So de facto, I own the wallet. However, if I were to trade with you for that wallet or something, then I would also have that legitimacy of claim, which doesn't actually play into economics, but it does play into things like when we're talking about private property norms, which is kind of a layer built on top of that economic structure. So the reason that this is important when we're talking about things like right to life is, I would say that you don't really have right to life, because life is kind of hard to measure. Life is a positive obligation. So then, like, if your kidneys go bad, do I have a moral obligation to provide you with dialysis? And I would say the answer is no, because then that means that I have a positive obligation that is effectively slavery, right? Yeah. Like, if you have a right to life that incorporates my moral obligation to keep you alive, then you can do whatever you want. You can do drugs or become an alcoholic or whatever, and then I still have to give you a chunk of my liver when things go downstream, right, or downhill. So instead, I would say that you have, the property norms. You have the property rights or property privileges to your body, and so I can't take that away from you, right? I can't trespass on your body with a knife. I can't trespass on your body with, things like that. And so we effectively get the same thing as a right to life, but without all of the kludginess that comes with rights language.
Otherwise, the work of charity is a work of obligation.
Yeah, and Lexi actually, she reminded me of something I've said in the past, which is if the right to life is an actual existing thing that creates moral obligations, then the crucifixion is less a work of charity and more a work of obligation. And to Thomas, that really starts to grate on them when it's like, well, then God had to do the crucifixion. And then, the whole charity angle gets thrown out the window, which people are prone to ignore. So it's kind of like
which I do get that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like full in 100% right to life because I believe in the death sentence. It's just like the mixture. It's hard to dissect.
It is. It's very difficult. It's funny because I'm not a fan of the death sentence, but I'm perfectly fine with gunning down criminals in the street. So it's one of those things where...
What's the delineation?
So the delineation is, with the case of the death penalty, we're assuming that, I just built into the terminology of the death sentence, we're talking about there's a person who's been captured, who is currently imprisoned, and we still consider them to be such a threat to society that the state has the ability and the authority to deprive them of their life as well as all their other freedoms, right? And this is where the church, traditionally has been like, well, yeah, if somebody's a sufficient threat to society and there's no way to properly imprison them, then kill them, right? So the church is not universally opposed to the death sentence, but something that has fallen out of that in the recent century or so is, the United States prison system, for all of its failures, is very good at keeping people in prison for life, for multiple life sentences. And so the death penalty...
Which isn't productive, though.
...becomes superfluous at that point.
Yeah.
But in the case of gunning down a criminal in the street, say, I'm pulling from a real life example, say I'm in Denver and I'm walking to the light rail station late at night and somebody and two of his big scary looking friends corners you with a knife and says, give me your wallet. And you say, okay, I don't want to give you my wallet. And they still get more and more aggressive even though you're giving them the wallet. And so you act in self-defense and somebody ends up getting hurt or killed, right?
Yeah.
In that situation, I would say that it's well within private property norms because they've demonstrated a preference for violating my property, right?
Yeah.
They've demonstrated a preference for, rather than arguing, right? Rather than, oh, we have a conflict, let's come to a resolution, let's discuss this like civilized human beings, rather than acting within the purview of human dignity, they're, choosing to engage in physical conflict. And so then it's just on my onus to win that conflict. The same sort of thing applies across the board then. So, somebody goes and robs a liquor store, right? The liquor store owner would be within his rights to resolve that conflict in as expedient a manner as possible because this person has demonstrated a preference for violating private property norms. So, of course, that results in kind of lifeboat scenarios of, the tribal warfare and, an eye for an eye, and it keeps escalating, and you have families feuding between each other and gangland assassinations. And I think that by and large, that is not a real issue looking at the economic incentives that people respond to. But it is something that needs to be addressed when we're discussing things in the abstract like this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to
I'm just trying to resolve the turbulence that it causes and focus it all in. Did you even get my idea about charity when I said it?
I did. I didn't see the whole long charity one, but I saw where you were going with it, and then I got distracted by kids and video games. But I understand what you're saying, where in a society that is sufficiently flourishing for whatever reason, charity would be something that would be less common as a matter of course. There'd be less of a market.
Exception, not the rule. Yeah,
right? There'd be less of a market demand for giving away stuff to people that haven't earned it because there would be more people earning more stuff and fewer people not earning things that they need to survive. And I agree with you, right? The reason why I immediately kind of threw up a red flag and was like, I think charity would be around in a free society or in the unhampered market is because there will always be a disparity in wealth. There will always be a disparity in quality of life between individuals. And so Even if, the difference is I drive a Rolls-Royce Excalibur and have a Lamborghini in the garage, and you have a Dodge Grand Caravan in the garage, right? There's that disparity there. And even then, I could be magnanimous with my wealth. I could make it a point to patronize poorer businesses to give them, or I could just give stuff away if I really felt like it. But ultimately, that's not much of a distinction between me driving my beat up 91 Geo Prism down the road and giving $1 to the guy on the street corner, because there's a similar kind of disparity in wealth. It's just people tend to stop paying attention to charity once it gets, past a certain threshold in quality of life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the ideal would be to eliminate charity so that you don't need it.
Really. Right. I mean, this is.
But that assumes that all the other factors are equal, like everybody's, equally as productive. They're making the same stuff, not to get into like the whole communistic side of it, socialist side of it, whatever. But like the ideal is that you don't give something to somebody, you actually, they can provide it for themselves.
Right.
Which isn't realistic, It's like choosing and picking the realistic versus the theoretical. Like I get your stuff on contracts, and I'm in insurance. That's all you really get when you buy your apartment or your house. Like all you're really buying is a promise the insurance company is going to cover it for this or that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Something you mentioned that sparked something, and now I've lost it. I guess one of the things too that took me a while to realize, even once I started doing the anarchy thing, was that this is more ontological, philosophical type stuff. But if we're trying to figure out how the world works now, we need to look at all the different moving pieces and stuff. Especially if we're looking at improving things, we can't start fixing things unless we know how it works right now, right? I can't just get in my car and start taking things out and putting things in unless I know what the things do and whether or not they're doing well. So when I was a communist, I was kind of putting the cart before the horse and trying to just improve society without understanding economics. And so while I've been trying to mine down and figure out like the fundamental operating system that all of this stuff that we do politically comes from, the two things that I've really kind of singled out is the state of nature is one that is simultaneously biologically driven. We have biological incentives to procreate. We have biological incentives that aid in our ability to successfully procreate. And on an animal level, that's what we are, right? We're just one of the most efficient species at producing more successful offspring than most other species on the planet. Then the other aspect of it is, I think, what most people refer to as anarchy. The Hobbesian.
Oh, yeah. Everybody has a bad. Everybody has a bad idea of anarchism, and
exactly.
I never understood it until like I started actually exploring it like in detail after like James' wedding.
Yeah. So the thing that I'm looking at though is people are like, well, in a state of anarchy, wouldn't like warlords emerge and take over everything, and then they would like be tyrants that rule everything? And then I kind of look at history and I go, oh, what we had was anarchy, and then a bunch of warlords took over, that sort of thing. And then, people say, well, who would prevent this from happening right now? And then I stop and I look at the real world right now and I go, well, that's already happening, right? Like the hitman example. People get hired for hitman work all the time. It just doesn't end up in the news. Most recent example that's actually ended up in the news a little bit is, I just forgot his name. The DNC staffer that may have been the WikiLeaks source.
Seth Richards or whatever.
Yeah, and he like just got gunned down in a random like mugging right outside a bar that he's always at in DC, and there's no police investigation whatsoever. It's like, that was clearly a political hit disguised as a common mugging in a very low crime area, and the fact that they're not investigating it kind of proves that point.
No, I agree.
So it's kind of I feel like there's a lot of double standards that are put in place when people are like, well, what would stop this from happening? And it's already happening or already has happened. It's like, well, then show me how your system has prevented it. But even more fundamental than that is once you start getting down to brass tacks and looking at the fundamental operating system, it already is anarchy, right? It already is the unhampered free market, and you just have these different criminal gangs, people that predicate their interactions with, based on things like theft or murder or coercion, things like that. And that's what most people refer to as governments or organized crime, which I have a hard time finding a delineation between the two, because what makes the mafia different than the federal government other than scope?
Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
Yeah. So when I've had that realization, two things changed in my disposition. The first thing that changed is, leading up to that point, I had a lot of very fiery anti-government rhetoric, where it's like, get rid of the government, burn it all down, round up all the politicians, put their heads on spikes outside on Pennsylvania Avenue, line the streets of DC with the corpses of the politicians, and if the police and military don't want to get in line, put them on the same gallows, right? It was very fiery anti-government rhetoric. And one of the things that changed is I began paying more attention to market functions, paying a lot more attention to market services. It's like, well, the police, in theory, provide a market service. They provide security. They provide criminal investigation. They provide a number of different things that are kind of in that same camp, right? It's a form of insurance, is what the police do, in theory. Fire department, same thing, right? Fire department is basically a fire insurance program, right? That's a market service that the government has basically monopolized. Looking at it that way, then, I've looked at the police less as an enemy, as a collective entity, right? The police are the bad guys. To individual police are bad, and the market service that the police provide is currently insufficient. That's why we have private security firms that exist and are successful. Instead, now the rhetoric has moved more from destroy this enemy in the context of the state, and more towards outcompete the enemy, right? Come up with your private security firm, build up your armaments, start defending neighborhoods from gangs, start defending private property owners from criminals, start providing security for corporations so that they're better able to conduct business, provide this service, people will pay you for it, people do pay for it. And then if you ever get to a point where the state tries to enforce its monopoly and say, you're doing too good a job, we're going to stop you now, that's when you say, mole on law, right? That's where you say, come and take it. And then you end up in a gangland war against the government. The difference is you're more likely to have public support than the local police or the National Guard, just given that you've provided a valuable service that people are willing to pay for voluntarily, whereas the state is forcing you to pay for it and doing a crappy job.
Yeah.
And I feel
the one issue I have with that is, go ahead.
Oh, I'm still here. I'm just closing my bedroom door.
Okay, so let's say I'm hanging at a bar right now. Somehow I end up with the guy in Fargo who owns all the roads in Fargo, because some people are going to be richer, some people are going to be poorer, right? I get in an argument with him, and he says, you can't use my roads anymore. You can't drive your car on my roads. Right? My work is 20 minutes away by car. That'd be probably, for me, running like an hour, about 13 miles. So how do you address a situation like that, where if somebody just doesn't like you for you and limits you against their property, then how do we address that situation?
That's a good question. I don't know how large a place Fargo is. I know it's a city.
100,000.
Okay. So the reason why I'm asking that is kind of twofold. The first, just to get it out of the way, the double standards argument is, well, the state already does that. If you don't have a driver's license, you're not allowed to drive on their roads. Fuck you, right? But then looking at the real argument, right? Looking at, rather than just your team does it too.
Well, you can't use my property argument. Like the state, I might not be able to walk, or I might not be able to drive on his road, but I can walk on somebody else's sidewalk.
Right. So that's kind of the first example that I was thinking of that's a solution to that problem, is that the odds of somebody monopolizing the roads in any area with a large enough population to have every square inch of land owned is fairly slim, because there will always be market competition. Even though there's a tendency towards economies of scale, the moment that you have somebody that has ownership over all the things, just by default, it's a monopoly, and it's subject to the market forces that apply to monopolies. The quality of their service will go down. The cost of their service will go up, as they're no longer able to respond to market signals, because they block out the market signals by being a monopoly. In which case, anybody has the ability then to respond to the market signal created by the monopoly and build a cheaper, better road, because as the monopoly gets bigger, the quality goes down, so it's easier to beat it in quality, and the price goes up, so it's easier to beat it in price. So it's an unlikely lifeboat scenario to occur, but in a small enough area with a rich enough guy, it's possible, right? If I had,
theoretically, it could happen in any big area.
Right. And if I had $1.5 billion,
could acquire all the assets.
Yeah, if I had $1.5 billion, I could buy the city of Detroit right now. And then I could do that very thing. I could be like, I don't like you. You're not allowed to be on any of the sidewalks or roads in Detroit because I don't like you. So the first solution is that guy's not likely to be in business for very long, because if you're a capricious person who's singling out individual consumers to say, you're not allowed to use my product, you're going to push people out of that market and welcome other people into the market as competition. The second one is...
I don't think that is the case, though. We certainly do have that. We have certain constituents who donate to Planned Parenthood, or you'll have certain people who go to Chick-fil-A, and they're still successful, but in the big, the overarching, scheme of the world, right? Like, how do we limit anything? I have a very high interest in funding the military for my own private security, right? So obviously I would donate to them. If I didn't pay taxes, I would donate, because, our personal security against another country coming in is a very high priority for me.
Right. I actually agree with you on that point. A lot of people get mad at me because I sound very anti-military, very anti-troops. But I'm like, no. I mean, given the option, I would probably fund somebody other than the DOD with my dollars. But that's because the DOD, again, monopoly services, they're really bad at what they do, and they spend a lot of money doing it. So I would fund a competitor, but the idea is still true. There are people out there that hate me for the color of my skin, and for the religion that I practice, and for the country, the region of the world that I live in. And so it would be prudent for me to spend some of my money on ensuring that those people can't get to me, right? So we're on the same page and with that specific issue. As far as limiting people goes, there's kind of two answers to that. The first is I err on the side of, at least until recently, I've always erred on the side of individual liberty, right? If you want to do a bunch of drugs and kill yourself with heroin, go ahead. That's not my problem, right? It's only my problem once you force me to subsidize your health care. That's when it becomes my issue.
Yeah, and it gets hard when you deal with like abortion, because they're like, oh, it's my body. And I say, well, the baby's not your body.
Right. It's an interesting thing, and it's fun to talk about in Catholic circles, because not traditionally with a capital T, but historically, the church's position has been what is closely paralleled to a libertarian position that exists now called evictionism, where it's like, you're not going to murder the baby, but if you happen to induce labor early and the baby's not viable, then oops. And there's been social stigma attached to that, but if you were to go to a priest about it, they would be like, well, that's not a good thing to do, but it's not exactly a sin either. It's this weird gray area because Aquinas said so, right? Now, that's kind of the my body argument, is as long as you're not reaching in there and ripping them apart and pulling them out piecemeal, technically you're within that evictionist argument. I think it's bullshit, because I think that you incur positive obligations through your interactions with other people, right?
Yeah.
If I go to your house and I give you a gift, I have a certain obligation of ensuring that that gift isn't going to actually turn out to be a bomb and kill you, right? I can't be like, oh, here's a coffee mug, and I happen to have loaded it with C4, so when you drink out of it, it's going to explode. I've effectively killed you. In the same sort of way, you know, I can't take on the responsibility or take on the experience of intercourse without opening myself up to the possibility of incurring the responsibility of caring for an individual that I brought into this world, right? If you take a ride in my car, I can't just kick you out for no reason. If you happen to be in my womb because I made it
like that plane incident,
huh?
like the was it United incident?
Oh yeah. I mean, admittedly, with the United thing, I'm more in favor of United than I am the guy that got kicked off. But that's a very specific kind of argument. But yeah, same idea, right? If they were 30,000 feet in the air and then they're like, "You're in my seat, get out," and chucked them out of a plane, that would not be acceptable. And that's the best analogy I have for the abortion argument. Is technically you can evict them, but you're only 20,000 feet in the air, so you know you're a murderer.
Yeah. You're sentencing them to death.
Now, if the guy was on the plane and started like violently threatening passengers or something like that, and then they evicted him from the airplane, I'm perfectly fine with that, right? Chuck communists from helicopters. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So now that I'm done monologuing, time for the original monologue. So I tend to err on the side of individual liberty, where I'm going to say, you do whatever you want as long as it's not violating my property, right? The other angle to it is I think that private property norms does a pretty good job of limiting people. Get out of there. Private property norms does a pretty good job of limiting people's ability to engage in criminal or vicious activity. I've written a few things about it on my blog, but nothing directly. It kind of tangentially comes into a lot of arguments. But the basic idea behind it is if every square inch of a certain area, like a village or a city or something, and there's a homogenous culture or a relatively homogenous culture in that area that's privately owned, then there are certain things that are just simply not acceptable, right? If we have a culture of, I don't know, we'll just call it a homophobic culture for the sake of pissing people off, right? We have a homophobic culture, right? We don't like gay people doing gay stuff. Gay stuff. We don't let them use our roads. We don't let them use our bars. We don't sell them stuff. And before you know it, they have to go somewhere else to get a job, get a house, get a ride. And that solves the problem in our neighborhood because we've limited that person's ability to successfully flourish in this environment. So then their options are to either stop doing gay stuff or leave.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that violence enters into that picture is if they decide to commit the crime of trespass or theft or whatever, as opposed to us initiating that aggression.
Yeah. I guess I get it in a way.
So, I mean, the way that the public floggings kind of ties into that, right, is if we have a culture in our little homogenous neighborhood area that you have two options, exile or flogging. You know, if you have any intention of repenting, you'll go for flogging because it's easier than moving away. There's less cost associated with it. So then I'll undergo the public flogging or a weekend in the stocks or whatever it is. I'll voluntarily give up those freedoms, give up that access to my property in order to secure my social position. So again, it's cost-benefit analysis. Which would you rather have, friends or an intact back?
Yeah. So that's a lot of stuff to process. I get what you're saying, and I'm kind of like I lean a lot that way, just because like I'm an individual. I can't control anybody else. I can't stop somebody from killing me. I can only control what I do specifically. So it makes sense. It's just processing through all of it. And like basically trying to figure out like how to make it happen as smoothly as possible. Because not everybody's going to have as smooth of a transition, I guess.
Yeah, transition is always difficult. And there's different possible solutions to the existing problem, right? If we're going to say the problem is we have a series of regional monopolies that are violently imposed, right? We've got the city, we've got the county, we've got the state, we've got the federal government, plus we have whatever random mafias happen to be operating in the area as well. We're trying to solve that problem. It gets really hairy really fast because you have the really extreme solutions, right? The ones that I've been pushing for in the past, where it's like, oh yeah, you just have a French Revolution, right? You just bring all the aristocrats.
Mob mentality.
Right. And then of course now I've got 4 kids to take care of. I've got a wife to take care of. I have a decent paying job. I have a lot of junk that I don't want to lose. So there's a high opportunity cost associated with pursuing that approach to solving the problem. Especially, like you said, I only have control over me. So I can't just marshal an army because I have to convince other people that it's worth their opportunity cost to join my militia and overthrow the government. So that's kind of why I've changed tactics a little bit, and I thought, well, maybe I should be involved in politics. Not because I believe that politics actually has any power to change anything for the better, but I would rather voice an opinion, voice a preference for Trump over Hillary Clinton, for example, than
I still vote. It's just a matter of, it's like, I don't like voting, but I will.
Yeah, it's something that's weird because I went a while without voting because I was like, voting is violence. Of course it's aggression. And now here I am. I'm going back to voting again, and I feel really dirty and gross doing it. But at the same time, I'm not guilty in the least. I'm like, no, I'm pretty confident this is the way things work. And again, we have a choice between Trump and Hillary. At least Trump says cool things. We know Hillary's going to be shit, right? Yeah. So
then as far as like freedom is concerned, here's like the one last catch up that I have as far as government is concerned, and I don't know, I'm still like figuring this out on the grand scale, as far as like why is setting up a governing body bad for us if we choose it, like we're just as free as not to choose a governing body as we do, at least for uniformity purposes, like right to life, right to guns. It's Alaskan. Like we're just as free to choose government as we are to not choose government.
Right. So of course there's a reason that government exists right now, right? I mean, clearly people are choosing that option more frequently than not. Otherwise there wouldn't be governments. Yeah.
And that's the hard part for me. That's one of the hard parts for me to digest is like, the ideal is that we don't need government. It's that we just kind of have it as a circumstance of like, we all want to agree, like we can all, we all have a right to life. We all have a right to free speech. And then we employ like the government is almost basically like a market that we choose to buy into, and there's things that we do like and we don't like, but it helps fall to the majority.
Right. You're right on my same page, actually. So this is a dilemma that I've been dealing with since I really learned how the tragedy of the commons operates, which is a long time ago, right? And I've been looking at the government as an example of the tragedy of the commons, where if you've got a lake and there's a certain number of fish in it and nobody owns the lake, then everybody that lives around the lake is going to fish as many fish as they can because they know it's a limited resource. So the incentive is to fish the lake into extinction. Whereas if somebody privately owns the lake and they charge people access to the lake, they have a vested interest in maintaining the fish population, and so they limit the number of licenses to fish the lake and stuff that they sell. And in theory, government does the same sort of thing, but I'd argue that government itself is an example, as a kind of a macrocosmic example of that tragedy of the commons, where what we have in a democracy is we have a large body of individuals all attempting to live at each other's expense. And even if we don't look at it that way, ultimately that's how we're voting, right? There's a reason people are crying in the streets over Hillary Clinton losing and Trump winning. There's a reason that people got violent and angry and mean when Obama won, right? And it's like, you know, they're looking at it from this angle of survival, and it's like, well, if we get Trump in office, maybe he won't steal as much of my shit and give it to somebody else. Meanwhile, the somebody else is like, well, if they vote for Trump, maybe he'll stop stealing other people's shit and giving it to us, right? And so this, we're all trying to live at each other's expense under a democratic framework. And if I don't vote, right, if I don't participate, then I'm going to fall victim to whichever majority most wants to take my stuff. And so I need to vote in self-defense. So now I'm roped into this program. So how many people out of the 57% of people that voted or whatever voted because they're really buying into the system, or did it because they're acting in self-defense? And then as kind of an underlayment on that whole issue, we have, you know, government, the state, isn't a homogenous entity, right? At any given point in time, in one territory, you know, looking throughout history, you can have the Assyrians ruling, you can have the Egyptians ruling, you can have the Romans ruling, you can have, you know, governments come and go, the same way that companies come and go, right? There are companies today that didn't exist last week, and there are companies last week that existed that don't exist this week. And so looking at governments as market actors, that's the same thing, right? The French monarchy worked great until it didn't. And then they replaced it with a republic, replaced it with a monarchy, replaced it with a republic again, and now they've replaced it with a, you know, open border socialist empire, right? Things like that. Now
they're reaping those benefits.
Oh yeah, most definitely, right? So I think that this is where my extremism starts to come out now, where before it was immediately just like anti-government, kill it all. But the more sane, cogent answer is yes. That's a problem. So the solution then is to create a competitor that is more beholden to market forces and able to move efficiently, and basically create your own government that's not actually a government, it's more like a corporation or a series of corporations. And you try to declare kind of a region of this sort of open market or unhampered market processes. So you basically have a state, but it's a state the same way the Vatican's a state, right? It exists as a state in order to be independent from Rome. That kind of the radical crazy one is the one that Mikey jumped on me for in Slack, which was, I argued that the state is a symptom rather than a cause in and of itself. It's comorbid with so many other symptoms that it creates. But the state—
No, I agree. It's a symptom
of a certain demographic of individuals that
it's created to allay a symptom, and then it becomes a symptom in itself.
Yes, I'm opposed to calling it a symptom that is trying to abrogate, but yes, I think the state is created in an attempt to uncouple people's behavior from the response to that behavior, right? They're trying to uncouple cause and effect. Where in a free market, if I have a short time horizon, I have a high time preference, and I would rather do drugs and not go to work and blah, 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 I'll have a great weekend, and then my life's going to be shit from there on out. Whereas if I have a longer time horizon, have a lower time preference, and I'm able to invest and properly manage or beneficially manage my resources, then I'm more likely to have a more happy, productive life in the long run. So then what the state is an attempt by these people that have short time horizons to mitigate that market response, and they create forms of welfare. And the only way to do that is by monopolizing market forces and then forcing integration into those market services. So that's how you end up with the police force, right? The police force declares monopoly over a region for defense, and then everybody has to pay into the bucket, even though certain people might benefit more from it than others. Where in a free market or an unhampered market, the prices would be dependent on the actual package that you're purchasing, the region that you're doing it in. Like in insurance, right? My car costs more insurance-wise now than it did a couple months ago, even though I only moved 1,400 feet. it was enough for my insurance premium to go up because I'm in a low rent housing place now, as opposed to right next door to a low rent housing place. And so now I'm paying, more because there's more risk associated with it. Same sort of thing with the police. If I live in a high trust gated community and I buy the minimum package for protection, that's going to be a lot cheaper than living right across the tracks in the low trust, high time preference region, and buying even the minimum package there, right? Because of the risk associated with it. There's a risk premium. And so where was I going with this? Oh, so how do we help with that transition? I'm not sure.
I think actually the thought that comes to mind is move into a so my idea is right now I'm living in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
You're living in Colorado. North Dakota is conservative, but they're highly stubborn. So they like really hold on to their conservative values, which is good in a way because we don't deal with the effects of like a lot of the other nation did. They didn't suffer from like the housing crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We have like the oil boom ups and downs, but like that's like one of the main configurations.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is to move into a highly stable environment and affect it from there.
Yes.
Because like I mostly believe in the whole ANCAP like idea, anarcho-capitalist, whatever. It's just how to actually implement it and spread it, you know, because California is obviously way left. Like they're communists, they're socialists, they're, I still think like socialism and communism is great in theory, but that's assuming 100% efficiency out of every single person.
Right. And then you have certain issues. I mean, this is the thing that broke me from being a communist was the economic calculation problem. There is no solution to the economic calculation problem.
Is you don't get like 100% efficiency.
Exactly. Efficiency of information is the thing that breaks it down. Even if you had a mega computer that tracked every moving part of the socialist market, without the price finding mechanisms in the unhampered market, it is impossible to regulate supply and demand. It's impossible.
Even still, like just the disparity between like there's a lot greater demand for a doctor than it is like a janitor.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can be a janitor, but you got to have like education for a doctor.
Yep. And the idea behind the Trotskyite thing was we're going to find people who are good at being a doctor and we're going to train them to be a doctor. And we're going to find people who are good at being janitors and we're going to train them to be janitors. And that's the way it's going to be. And everybody's going to go along with it because they believe in the system. But you still have to know how many doctors we need, what kind of doctors. There's no way to know that without the price finding mechanism.
So you did recommend a book, but you put it in like abbreviation. Like I'd like to read a couple books on it.
Okay.
Just to understand. So I wanted you should text me a couple books I should read on it.
Okay.
Because I get the philosophy behind it and I agree with it. I think it's really turbulent, especially for the society we're living in. But like my philosophical theory right now is that every time you have to introduce government into something, it's a regulation, and a regulation is limiting people in some way. You're saying either you can't go here or you have limits when you come here, like stop signs, I follow stop signs, to the T, I pull up to the stop sign and I stop. That's regulating me from just like keeping on driving, but it keeps me safe.
Right.
So like, I want like an over encapsulating like book that explains like, like all the anarchist capitalist, view look. And so I just haven't read books on it, Like this is all things that I've just like thought of myself, and like you and James, whatever, Monty, Marcellino, like, you guys have provided feedback, but this is stuff like that I've like really cultivated in myself. And I'm like, what's best for the human race? Like, even in the Bible, you know, God didn't want to give them a leader, but people wanted a leader to guide them.
That's one of my favorite things, right? People are like, well, Israel had a king, so how can you say that kings are bad? And I'm like, well, read where the king came from. And yeah, it's like, okay, this guy, the people want a king, God, and God's like, are you sure? Did you check? Are you sure okay, go tell them this. I'll give you a king, but he's going to tax the shit out of you. He's going to rape your wives. He's going to send your children to die. Everything's going to go to shit forever if you take a king. And they're like, we still want a king. And he's like, okay, I warned you.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like, the ultimate freedom, it's like St. Paul, though. That's why, like, you should definitely join the Lawless Heirs. Is we're not slaves, we're children of God, you know? And like, I found that in the same as I do with like our politics, but
yeah. There's something about the books. You said something. I'm like, books. So I'll send you a text, or I'll send you something in Slack. The book that's kind of the end of Austrian economics, right? It's the goal, it's the telos, it's the final finished product, is the book that I recommended in acronym form, which is Democracy, the God That Failed, which is a very long
democracy fails just like anything else.
Right.
I mean, we're kind of seeing it in America, you know?
So what that book covers is it kind of takes for granted that you know a few things about Austrian economics. So that's why I say it's kind of like the end goal. Like, if you just
what's Austrian economics? Because literally I know nothing, and I know what I know. You know,
right?
What's Austrian economics?
Okay, so in a nutshell,
take me as a novice.
Huh?
Take me as a novice. Like, literally, all these things I've looked at, I just look at from an individual perspective and how it affects me.
Yep.
And like, my whole perspective is I'm an individual and I can do so much, you know. Whatever. I get the mob mentality. I get the mob boss mentality of somebody like, you know, the government, which is the IRS, saying like, you don't pay us taxes, we're going to put you in prison. You know, like, I don't have to read a philosophical book to understand that. You know, I'm just reasonable enough to get it.
Yeah, I think people by and large start out that way too. Like, my kids, I haven't really gone out of my way to indoctrinate them, but like, they see somebody get pulled over on the side of the road by a cop, and they're like, well, what's going on there? I'm like, well, they were driving faster than the speed limit, right? The sign says go this fast. They're driving faster than that. So this guy's job is to pull them over, tell them they were going too fast, to make sure all of the other things about their car are following the rules, and then to take their money because they broke the rule. And they go, well, who makes the rules? I was like, well, politicians and stuff. And they're like, well, that's stealing, right?
Yeah.
Like, a 4-year-old can figure out that that's theft, right? But then grown-ups, we've built all this extra crap on top of it to justify it and rationalize it. And a 4-year-old's just like, well, that's stealing. That's not okay. You're lucky you're a friend of mine, because I'm charging this guy, my client, to do the same exact thing. I think we have a contract for $600 for the rest of the year, basically, and have conversations back and forth and stuff. But so I'll do it for free for you. But
well, so I think we're of the same mind, so it kind of just helps. We're both proponents of the same thing. But go ahead. I said we're both proponents of the same thing.
Yeah, we're pointing at the same thing. We're just having a hard time calibrating to figure out which way is the best way to get there.
Yeah.
So in Democracy, the God That Failed, Hans Hermann Hoppe, he's the guy that wrote it. He's kind of the inheritor of this whole tradition of libertarianism from a philosophical angle. He assumes that you know a little bit about economics. He assumes that you know what he calls argumentation ethics, but is basically the idea of like the non-aggression principle, basic private property norms, the preferability for arguing in order to resolve a conflict as opposed to just punching somebody in the face and taking their stuff. So then he operates from those basic assumptions to kind of point out all of the different economic incentives that are at play in different governmental structures. So he talks about where monarchy came from historically. He talks about where monarchy succeeded, where monarchy failed, where monarchy went from being a valuable market service to being an illegitimate governmental criminal enterprise. And then he goes into the economic incentives on democracy and why democracy by default, because of the state of nature, is doomed to failure because the economic incentives are built against it. And then he gets into all the inner workings of how that all works together. And then in the third part of the book, he talks about, well, where do we go from here, right? We can't just go back to 550 AD and be like, okay, we're back to a pre-monarch era. We have early allodial feudalism. We've got contracts on landlords and stuff. We can't do that, right? The egg has already been cracked. The cherry's been popped. We have democracy. Everything's turned to shit. What do we do now? And so from that point on, he kind of argues about different market solutions that can operate within the current framework to get us from here back to the state of nature sans criminal enterprise, right? So that's always the book that I point to first, and I say your goal, if you're trying to understand this, is to do enough homework that you can read this book and understand it. My mistake was I read that book first, and it was very confusing. So there's a couple other books. The problem is they're all very big, right? I would say Human Action or Man, Economy, and State, they're both 900 pages long, right?
Or take like a few different books to read, you know? Either it's a very big book or you have to read like 10 books.
Exactly. I think you could get away with reading either Human Action or Man, Economy, and State, and then reading Democracy, the God That Failed. Historically, that skips a good chunk of the history of libertarian philosophy, but one basically teaches you all of the basic stuff that you need to know to understand how praxeology and economics works. And then you can jump to the end and be like, okay, I have a working knowledge of how all this works. I understand the vocabulary. So when Hans Hermann Hoppe starts throwing around time preference and meritocratic institutions and things like that, you can kind of, okay, I know what he's talking about, and just roll with it. So I'll send you a short list, maybe 2 or 3 books.
No, that'd be great.
I
think you should write your own freaking book, because
I've technically written 2, but they're shit. So I'm hoping by the end of this year to have a 3rd one written that's not shit. And I'm actually going to market the crap out of it. Like I'm going to print off copies of it, or I'm going to buy copies of it from the printer and put it in like the little free libraries that are all around town and stuff with my business card slipped in it, and like go on Facebook and go whole hog and all the secret shit posting groups I'm in and be like, I wrote this book, read it and tear it apart, and then hopefully people will read it and be like, oh, this is good, I'll give it to my friend who doesn't get it, kind of, spread it that way. Maybe even hire a marketing firm to market it. But
you write a book, I'll buy it. You get me a product, I'll buy it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have 2. I got Monty to buy one of them.
Did you?
Yeah. He posted a video of him taking it out of the box and then like feeding it to his dog. It was amazing. But he technically still hasn't read the chapter he told me he would read and get back to me on, which is how can an anarchist be Catholic and vice versa. That's the reason he bought the book.
Well, I mean, because we get into that whole conversation of give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yep.
But then you end up with, well, what is actually Caesar's? That's my whole argument, is what is Caesar's and what is not Caesar's,
Right. And I mean, that's a direct reference when they're using words like image and stuff. I mean, that's the same basis that the church uses for like, oh, we're created in the image and likeness of God. And so it's, okay, so what is Caesar's? Is the coin Caesar's? How about you? Are you Caesar or are you God's? Like my former Archbishop
We're not God, but we're, like little forms of God.
Yeah. And
I mean, that's getting into like theological aspects, which I don't like to talk about that stuff because I'm not like theologian per se. But, I can definitively say, because I back an accredited institution. This is what I get into with like Protestants, is like, we're an accredited institution, you're not. So I don't know.
Yep. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that argument.
Yeah.
But,
Get your gun. Let's get out.
But it's very loaded. It's very loaded. So I don't know. You can get into a million things with Protestants, but yeah. No,
the one thing that I have to say about it that I just think is so cool is, if you read the scripture with kind of a cultural understanding, it has a lot more impact. And so it's a lot of things
I agree.
A lot of things that Jesus said and did, like to a modern day American that doesn't understand, Semitic culture back in 0 AD, is kind of like, oh, okay, that's cool. He like cast the demons into the pigs, and he like said this thing and it insulted that guy. That was pretty cool too. And then but then in the case of the render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, the Pharisees that were coming to him, and they're like, should we pay the tax? They were talking in a very specific context. This is right before the money changers and everything in Jerusalem. And what's going on there is the temple was charging fees that they always have charged for different services. But in order to get political benefits from Rome, they switched from shekels and stuff to the Roman currency. And so the Pharisees were all high and mighty, and they're like, we're too good to use Roman money. But then when they would go to the temple in order to get their tax benefits, they would exchange their money for Roman money and go into the temple and do. That's why the money changers got kicked out, is because they were being hypocrites. Right? Jesus had a big thing about hypocrites. But so what he says, produce the coin you use for the tax. And the Pharisees had in their wallets the coins that they say you're not allowed to use. And they procure the coin. And Jesus is like, oh, so you've got the coin you're not allowed to use. He doesn't say that, but he already demonstrated it right there. And so when he says, give Caesar what is Caesar's, he's like, what are you doing with this dirty Roman money? Right?
Yeah.
Rome's money. Use the Jew money, dang it. And so the Pharisees kind of got caught in their own little trap, trying to trap Jesus with the same argument.
Bitcoin.
To no one, basically.
Yeah.
So I can't ever let that slide, because people don't know that one very often. It's just like, ooh, it's a perfect little jab that he got in there that people aren't aware of.
Yeah. No, and I get that. And it's like, well, what's Caesar's money? Because it's such a small slot of Catholicism.
Yep. So I argue with Protestants a lot too. I've got some Protestant friends I got through one guy. When I was working at Starbucks, I was talking philosophy with one of my coworkers, and we were talking about substance dualism, so like mind-body problems and stuff like that. And this guy, he's a college professor at the Denver Seminary, right down the street from where I live, and he's a philosophy professor at a Protestant seminary, and he's high church Episcopalian. Like, the only reason he's not a Catholic is because he's afraid of modern popes. He thinks that modern popes are Marxist and communist. I'm like, yeah, they are. Sorry.
Yeah, kind of.
Can't quite get on board with transubstantiality because he understands substances in the traditional Greek sense, where Aristotle would not allow for transubstantiation, where Aquinas took Aristotle and ruined him in order to argue for transubstantiation. So he's got a really solid philosophical argument to back up his unwillingness to believe in the Eucharist.
Careful, because I don't understand a lot of ancient Greek philosophy.
And
like, generally, I fall back to Aristotle or Aquinas. But I haven't been able to evaluate theirs for what it is. I guess per se, like, I can get some of the arguments, or I can't argue it. I haven't been able to evaluate it as like a person.
It's and there's so much homework that you have to put into it that I really don't blame anybody who hasn't done that homework, because there's just a huge opportunity cost associated with it, right? I have literally spent most of my life, like percentage-wise, reading these things, arguing about these things, listening to lectures about these things. When I'm at work, I'm listening to podcasts, books on tape, lectures. And the only reason I do it is because I can't not do it. I will literally go insane and start like killing people if I can't do this. So it's like a mental disorder, right? But normal people, they would rather, you know, have a normal conversation with a normal person about normal things. I'm like, okay, division of labor. It's my job to go through all this homework. It's my job to read all the books, listen to all the lectures, make all the arguments. And then if it becomes pertinent to what you are trying to do, whether that be some sort of psychological thing or some sort of political thing, that's where my job comes in and I start consulting, right? So I'm not a big fan of academia, but I definitely appreciate things that it's contributed to my ability to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But,
so what do you think of Trump?
He's got a bunch of loans.
What do you think of Trump's loan forgiveness bill?
I haven't looked into it yet. There's so much going on politically that I can't keep on top of everything. But
I think it's a form of communism, though. Yeah, like
loan forgiveness is unacceptable. Period.
Well, I mean, the idea behind it really is like, let's at the end of the day, it's like, let's strap it onto the taxpayers. So you're forcing somebody who didn't want to buy a product to pay for something that they didn't offer.
Right.
And I realize there's some goodness in it. Like, hey, maybe we have a surplus in the budget, you know, because we invested wisely. I don't know, like.
The one way I would be in favor of a sort of. The one thing I would be in favor of with like the student loan forgiveness and stuff is if it were bundled into a larger package that actually solves the problem. Right.
Yeah.
So the problem is we're incentivizing purchasing diplomas, which is effectively what you're doing when you go to college.
Yeah.
We're subsidizing loans that are bad loans, right? It looks just like the housing crisis, right? We're subsidizing loans that are bad loans. We're incentivizing banks through securing these loans by various means. In the case of the housing bubble, it was, we're just going to insure all the loans even though they're shit loans. In the case of the student loans, we just say you can never declare bankruptcy, right? You always have to pay the loans. And if you don't, your kid—
It's a form of slavery.
Right.
Really.
And so that's the way they're securing and incentivizing these loans. And then on top of that, they're incentivizing the course of action that those diplomas take place. There's a reason there's more liberal arts degrees than there are STEM field degrees demographically across all things being equal. So the problem, the reason why we have all these student loans that people can't pay off and why they all have gender studies majors and stuff are these perverse incentives that the government has produced in the market. So if we were to unveil a bill that basically said, we're going to stop paying colleges, we're going to stop incentivizing loans, we're going to stop subsidizing loans, we're going to stop securing loans, we're going to allow you to declare bankruptcy and get rid of your student loans, etc. Basically go back to square one, and we're going to offload all of the student loan debt onto the taxpayer in order to resolve this immediate issue that we've created over the last 80 years.
But it's robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly. And again, this is a discussion that I've been having a lot with a bunch of anarchists and libertarians these days, which is I could be autistic about it, right? I could decouple all context from the situation and just say, well, raising taxes is a violation of the non-aggression principle, therefore it's bad. But then I can also say that—
well, taxation is theft no matter what.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
I don't really—
And I can also say that we're violating the non-aggression principle by having basically committed fraud and tricking people into getting these useless loans and selling themselves into indentured servitude.
Which they did.
Huh?
Which they did. I would have never gone to college.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
The biggest reason— I have a bunch of reasons that all kind of culminated in the solution, but the biggest reason why I dropped out of college is I was researching the housing collapse and realized that education is the next bubble. And I was like, shit, I'm never going to pay off $120,000 in student loans for a philosophy degree, right? Best case scenario, I get a job tutoring somebody on how to read in a public school, and then I'm fucked. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to get out while I'm only 30,000 in and move on with my life. And that's what I did. I dropped out of college, got a job, paid off my student loans, and moved on with my life. It was like, oh, that was a crisis that narrowly got averted. I mean, it's done harm to my job prospects. You know, people are like, oh, well, you went to college and then you dropped out. What happened? And I explain. They're like, oh, this guy's like really smart, but that doesn't help him get a job in this particular field. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm doing okay for myself now. It's taken time to get here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so both of those are violations of the non-aggression principle. So then either I can just say, well, it's all bad, I don't want to have anything to do with it, and just back off. Or I can kind of analyze it and go, which has the least bad impact on the market? And what that sort of bill that I'm proposing would do is it kind of forces the state and the higher education services and the market to behave like a market again, rather than being beholden to all these different perverse incentives. And so same sort of thing as the borders discussion, right? In libertarian circles, you've got people arguing for open borders, you got people arguing for closed borders. They both have very libertarian arguments to back them up. But at the end of the day, I'm actually a very regulated, almost closed borders type guy at the end of the day, because both open borders and closed borders are violations of the non-aggression principle. And so we have to determine which one is the least damaging to the unhampered market. And I would say very strictly regulated border, a closed border, would be less detrimental to the market than an open one. And it's more conducive to establishing a libertarian social order, which is the end goal, right? It's the Hans Hermann Hoppe thing again. How do we get from here to where I want to be? So
yeah, no, I feel like we're like very like aligned in like our ideas of like, you know, I'm just still working through a lot of them that you've already figured out.
Oh yeah, I definitely haven't figured everything out either, and I've changed my mind a whole bunch even recently. But the way I came into it, behind all the college stuff, right? When I was at Ave, somebody actually gave me a copy of Democracy, the God That Failed, and that's what kicked this all off. They were arguing for Catholic monarchy, and I'm like, you missed the point of the book. I think this guy wants to put corporations in charge, not a Catholic monarch.
Well, that's why I asked. Amber, can I get one more? Can you have a chance? You can take them. No, yeah.
But ultimately what it was is one day I sat down and went, oh, not only does communism not work, but all forms of government are basically variations on the theme of communism. They're all subject to the same failures. So I turned to Lexi and I'm like, I think I might be an anarchist. And she's like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll get back to you. And then like a year or two later, then I'm like, oh, I think I've got it. And I've got some books I'm going to read and some podcasts I'm going to listen to. I've got this figured out now. And I've just been on this trajectory ever since I started finding resources and arguing with people on the internet. So,
well, yeah, because it's a different frame of thought. The idea that like when I'm explaining to somebody like, yes, government can be good for people, like in certain circumstances, like we've needed it throughout history. But the ideal form of government is no government at all, because every time you need a form of government, like that's a limit on your human freedom. And so right now, like we as humans need like regulation on traffic, you know, but that's limiting your freedom, you know, security for freedom. Ben Franklin said, you know, anytime that somebody gives up freedom for security, that's, you know, you don't get freedom at all.
Yeah, you get neither and you deserve neither, or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think we agree highly in the sense of it, and I'm just trying to like explore the ways without so much the turbulence of human freedom. Like how do we accomplish it? You know, like how do you spread it? Like I got into an argument like I can't remember if I told you, with a feminist at that Christian coffee shop about, you know, I was like, I'm very highly interested in keeping our national freedom. But then I didn't finish the story, if I remember correctly. But I have no interest in Planned Parenthood. You know, whether they provide, you know, pregnancy options or not, you know. At the end of the day, like if they stop providing whatever abortion services, like I have no interest in funding them. So like, why am I paying for a service that I don't need? Because A, I'm not a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, in theory, looking at it from an economic perspective, in theory, if Planned Parenthood provided a legitimate female medicine service, right? We could even pretend
That's assuming.
but
We're quotes on that.
yeah. But I mean, even if we're assuming that, and then we say we live in a society in which women don't work, right? We have a traditional American, the man is the breadwinner, the woman stays at home, blah, blah, blah. Then it would make sense to a certain degree to have men subsidize women, right? Whether that be taxpayers subsidizing female medicine, or whether that be husbands, fathers, brothers subsidizing their wives, children, nieces, whatever. But even then, the market does a more efficient job of it than the government does. So this is kind of an interesting thing to kind of start looking at it in kind of economic terms a lot of times. But yeah, I think that we have a lot in common ideologically. We might have a few aesthetic differences, and I'm certainly downplaying a little bit more of my more radical opinions for the sake of this conversation. But when we're looking at this together, it's a lot of fun to look at how can we seamlessly make this transition. And there's a lot of focus that we need to, we have to put a lot of focus on that transition and kind of the security of people, because we do both care for other people, right? I am kind of a sociopath. James disagrees, but I am kind of a sociopath. I'm like, I care about.
No. Well, we kind of agree on the principles that we agree on the. I think we agree on the principles that the person in me says I should always do best for what's for me.
Yeah.
But the divine side says like I should do best for others too. You know, not just for me. There's things that may not be best for me, but I'm willing to concede that for the best for you. You know, like true charity.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I get in trouble with Monty a lot, because I've kind of redefined a lot of virtues as the church has traditionally referred to them, to reflect a more.
It's been 2,000 years. We have to
Yeah. But a lot of times I'm kind of going back to, again, ancient Greek, ancient pagan understandings of these virtues, because I think that there were a lot of kind of mistakes made in the Middle Ages with Christian theology. I
agree with that.
So in the case of like charity, when we're looking at charity, there was no pagan concept of charity. The modern or the medieval charity that came into existence was derived from the Roman word caritas, which just means to care about something, right? Yep. It didn't even have anything to do with love. It didn't have anything to do with altruism, but I care about my horse and my chariot. I care about my slaves. I care about that really cute girl over there. I care about my wine, right? It's the same way that Americans use the word like or love, right? I love pizza. I love sushi. I love lamb. It's not this highfalutin Christian ideal of altruism that we're talking about. It's a very material, capitalist, pagan, me and mine kind of word.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at altruism, I think even in the case of self-sacrifice, right? Even in the case where I'm going to say, I'm going to give up this benefit I have for the benefit of somebody else. What I'm doing is I'm engendering within myself a Christian love, charity. So even then, I'm benefiting by conducting myself in a virtuous way. If the goal is apotheosis, if the goal is
let me put you on hold for like 1 second.
Okay.
Can I buy a smoke from any of you ladies?
You can have one, but we all smoke menthols.
That's fine. I don't care. Just gonna drop that there. Can I have a lighter?
Well, now you definitely need to pay.
Yeah. Well, the lighter costs
Like
a
now
dollar.
it makes sense.
Want us to smoke that cigarette for you too?
Thank you. Still there?
Yep, still here. Yeah, so basically where I'm going with that is, from a theological angle, if our goal is apotheosis, I think the Roman equivalent, sorry, I'm learning Byzantine vocabulary and forgetting Roman vocabulary. I think the Roman vocabulary is the communion of saints, right? If we're looking for full and total communion with God, the only way that that can be accomplished is if we are of the same character and the same type as God.
Yeah.
So even though it sounds like Pelagianism, it's not. But the idea is what I do, the way that it influences my salvation, the way it influences my judgment, isn't keeping myself clean or keeping myself pure or something like that. It's more conditioning myself to be God-like, conditioning myself to be amenable to the divine will. And so in that regard, when I'm doing charity, I'm not just doing it out of selflessness, because that's impossible. I'm a human being. I do everything for my own benefit. So instead what I'm doing is I'm doing it in order to mimic that divine love, in order to become more God-like, in order to come into full and total communion with God, in order to become divine. Of course, that's impossible without the crucifixion and blah, blah, blah. So it's not Pelagianism, but it sounds a lot like it.
Yeah. Well, that's a big stumbling block, but that's Catholicism.
Yep. We love to exist in tension, in contradiction. What's the? I'm totally drawing a blank on a common vocabulary word. I don't remember. Whatever it is when you have a contradiction. Something that's in tension, but it's not really a contradiction. You just haven't untangled it yet. I don't remember the word. But
I don't know. I mean, I guess I have a couple big
paradox.
Paradox, yeah.
Tension and paradoxes.
I have a couple big I have a couple big life questions, I guess, that I've had, and one of them was Catholicism, and another one is politics. You know, and they kind of just go hand in hand.
Oh yeah, there's I think a majority of anarchist libertarian types are all atheists, because of that close relationship that the state and the church have always had. So the moment you start questioning political authority, you start questioning divine authority. If the king's an asshole, why isn't the Pope an asshole? And it's really hard to delineate between the two. And I'm in the same boat. I'm the most devout Catholic. I'm the most, well, I'm not the most devout Catholic, but I'm the most pious and believing agnostic you will ever see. I don't know if God exists or not. I can't speak to that one way or the other, but I'm also discerning the priesthood in the Byzantine Catholic Church. So
yeah. I mean, it's like you can't prove God exists physically, but God's not physical. But if you take science for what it is, and that's the side I fight from. I put everything to the iron, and atheism just doesn't cut it for me. Neither does democracy or whatever, the Constitution. We're fighting from the same side. You can say we have these rights, but really it's just in reality it's just like a contract, as you like to say. I'm it's just a piece of paper. You can't hold that piece of paper up, to stop somebody from shooting you.
Yep.
What you can do is pull out your own gun and shoot them.
Exactly.
Too bad. You missed out.
Yep.
But,
and as always, if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck. right?
Yeah.
So if you're gonna pull a gun on me, I need to pull a bigger, better gun, or I need to be ready for it. So yeah.
I mean, I think we're always going to be dealing with like, but I just don't know how to institute. I'm trying to figure out how to institute the idea without the repercussions of like immediately, like if we said tomorrow, like the United States government is disbanded, it's shut down. It's like, how do you, like this isn't like a 1-day process. It's a 30-day process. 30-year process possibly.
Yep.
Of like, it's 2017. Humans have been around on the world for what, like
150
3,000 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, 150,000 years, whatever you want to call it. We're unique in that we have the ability to reason. We don't have to shoot each other. We don't have to fight with other packs. We don't have to.
Yeah.
And especially since I'm in a very Muslim-prone area, there's a lot of Muslims in our area.
Yeah.
So I just feel like
you're a little bit wary of your neighbors if the state restrictions on their stuff is alleviated.
Yeah, and I'm in one of the most conservative areas around, but it's not traditional conservatism like
Right.
you run into.
Muslims are very conservative in a lot of ways. They're also very liberal in a lot of ways. It's a weird, Western sentiments can't compartmentalize Islam very easily, especially since there's so many different variations of it. Yeah. And you got burqas on one side and stonings and stuff like that, and then on the other side you have humping goats and your nieces.
Yeah.
And so it's a little weird. So I mean, if there were the big red anarchy button, right? If there were a button right here on the desk that I could push and make all the governments go away right away, or just the United States federal government, or just the state of Colorado, or whatever, right? Whatever government we're doing, I would push the button in a heartbeat. Now. That's going to cause a lot of problems. You're absolutely right. There would probably be one of those George Carlin style end of the world scenarios that he likes to get into, with people stabbing social workers and trying on their underwear and burning down the hospitals and whatever. All the meth labs start exploding all over the countryside. And I mean, part of it is I would prefer to have a kind of controlled demolition. I would prefer okay, well, we'll get rid of this service, that service, that service, that service, and start at the top and start with the most detrimental things and work our way down. So you get rid of 3-letter acronyms. You get rid of the Department of Education, Department of Energy, Homeland Security, TSA, whatever.
Yep.
Start going down that list. Eventually you get down to the military, but at the same time, you start deconstructing all the other welfare programs, right? You get rid of stamps, corporate welfare, things like that. You start massively cutting back on expenditures on everything, so you start cutting back taxes commensurately. You start defaulting on debts, right? You start just telling people, fuck you, I'm not paying my loans, to the Federal Reserve, to China, to Russia, that sort of thing. And as you're doing this, market services necessarily emerge to start replacing the services that the government's backing out of, until eventually all you've got left is military, police, and borders. And then you get rid of the borders, get rid of the police, get rid of the military, and then the market will have results already available. More likely than not, though, the more likely scenario is market correction, right? The same way the housing bubble collapses, the same way that you have a run on the banks in the 1914, 1920, 1924. I don't remember when the Great Depression happened, right? You have the Great Depression. It's a market correction.
Late 1920s, yeah.
So then when you have the government, and the government is a market or an industry just like any other, now that it's included everything under its umbrella, when it corrects, it's going to bring everything down with it. And there will be that state of typical anarchy where everything goes to shit. You have people murdering each other in the streets, taking their stuff, warlords emerging. It's just the way that humans behave when things change, right? Especially when you have a bunch of R-selected people, a bunch of K-selected people. This irritates James when I bring up R K-selected applies to humans.
So here's a good question. What do you mean by are selected? Because I've seen you like post that, but I don't know what you mean.
Okay. It's a big thing. So if we don't have a lot of time, I can just do a really quick overview. But
Yeah.
Basically in nature, you have R-selected organisms, which, lowercase r in like physics and stuff is rate. And R-selected organisms, their reproductive strategy has been evolutionarily selected for producing a large number of offspring and investing little to no resources into their success, right? Sea turtles lay 1 billion eggs on the beach and then go away. And then all the baby sea turtles hatch and run for the beach, and seagulls swoop down and pick them up, and random tourists pick them up and take them home. They get stuck in oil slicks, they get baked in the sun, and a certain number of them survive, but there's no meritocracy in it. It's just random. So there's no reason to invest in any one of them more than any of the others, because odds are that one's going to get eaten or baked in the sun or whatever. Rats, rabbits, a lot of reptiles, a lot of birds kind of do this, where they just lay a ton of eggs or have a bunch of babies and then just let them loose and see who wins. Then you have K-selective forces that have evolutionarily selected for different species. Capital K is usually load-bearing weight in engineering. That's where that term comes from. Yeah. So it's, you have fewer offspring, but you invest a ton of resources into their success. So like wolves have a small litter and will teach them how to hunt and feed them and keep them safe until they grow. Bears, elephants, a lot of primate species are K-selective. And this isn't a result of like, oh, this is just the way they are genetically. But if you look at it evolution-wise, the environment has selected for those behaviors. And so it's an adaptive trait that they have. So then when you look at humans, you can argue that with the evolutionary history of 150,000 years and a relatively malleable genome, that you begin to see humans that respond to environmental forces, right? You have people with darker skin in some regions and lighter skin in other regions. Yeah. That's a result of adaptive processes over 150,000 years. So as an extension of that, then you have a bunch of other things that are less visible, but manifest themselves in reproductive strategy. So you have R-selective processes and K-selective processes. In an environment where resources are rich, success is random, there's no need for planning for the future. You have a lot of R-selective incentives to produce a ton of offspring and have them eat all the food that they can eat because it's in surplus. And if any of them happen to get sick or die along the way, it's okay, I've got 20 other kids. But if you live in an environment where there's season, right, so you can only get food for a certain percentage of the year, and you have to wait the remaining percentage of the year to get food again, you have to learn how to delay gratification. You've got to learn how to invest resources more appropriately. Death is still random, but there's also a lot of predators that come into effect. There's a lot of the ability to plan for the future is an adaptive process in these environments where sometimes bears come out of caves all at the same time and get hungry, right? If you're in Africa, lions just eat whenever they eat. Bears come out at very particular seasons. They're really aggressive during those seasons, that kind of thing. And so then you tend to select for more K-like behaviors. So you have people that have fewer offspring, invest more resources into them, do their best to keep them alive, because these are my only 2 children, only 6 children, only whatever children. And so I've got to have success in that way. It's a lot more meritocratic. So then if we're looking at evolutionary drivers and pretending that humans are mere animals, which
you're breaking up a little bit. I might have to go back inside.
Mere animals, then everything we do is biologically driven. Everything towards reproductive success. And so my politics are downstream from my genetic approach to things.
Hang on. Can you hear me?
Barely. It's kind of windy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Basically, then I vote in accordance with my biological drivers for reproductive success. So if I'm K-selective, I'm going to vote for a more meritocratic, more competitive environment where, you succeed or fail based on your own merits, and nobody's obligated to serve as a safety net if you fuck up. Because all that does is it increases your ability to succeed at my expense, and that's not conducive to my offspring's procreation. Whereas if I'm R-selective, right? I'm going to have a bunch of kids and I want to be uncoupled from the repercussions of those actions because that's the environment that I evolved in. Then I'm more likely to vote to have other people subsidize my behavior, right? I'm going to vote to have people pay me to have children, for instance, things like that. And so that's how you get people looking for student loan forgiveness. Is an R-selective trait that is compounded by R forces.
I mean, I guess I still have, I mean, I still got 20 grand in student loans.
Yep.
In the same breath, I don't want student loan forgiveness. I just want to pay off my debts, you know, and call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That's like a fight you deal with. You're either going to pay it forward on the front end or you're going to pay it on the back end, you know. But I don't expect the guy who didn't go to university to pay for my debts for me. And that's why I'm so like anarcho now, is I get that, like, I just want to pay my dues for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to have a good, healthy understanding of anarcho-capitalism before I start producing it.
Yep.
Because like I was very much a monarchist before, you know, before like this year, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you have to be like very concrete with people.
Yep.
Even with the girl I got into a debate with today, you know, like overall it's bad for them to mandate human health care for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like if you look in the future, if they mandate healthcare for everybody in the future, you know, and they give the incentives, is that bad? That they like mandate these like healthcare initiatives, you know, like be healthy, don't eat bad foods,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or otherwise you're not insurable, you know.
Right. And it's really exciting to me to have you coming from the angle of understanding the basic operations of insurance, because the answer to a lot of these questions I found that are most rhetorically successful when you're like arguing with people is kind of, so what is the goal, right? So, okay, I like healthcare. Healthcare makes me feel good. I want everybody to have healthcare. So then it's like, okay, what's the goal, right? Is healthcare an end in itself, or is the goal to have everybody be healthy, or is the goal to have everybody live a particular lifestyle, right? So you have to figure that out. But usually,
but how do you regulate that though? Like, or do you not regulate it at all? It's my same situation with healthcare, or I'm sorry, education, right? So in the same breath that I'm against healthcare, I'm against education. Like I like the idea of universal healthcare because everybody needs health. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fact of life. You're going to get old at some point, but
Yep.
I don't think you should force them to. You know, like I haven't been to a doctor in 10 years, so
Right.
like, why should I pay into a system for 10 years? You know, and like overall, the same thing with education. Like, I might not necessarily need the education, but it's giving me the opportunity to. So how do you actually like regulate these things or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the nation institutes, whatever, you have to go through middle school and high school, educational wise, just so that you're at least like they're basically mandating you to make the choice. And how do you do it in a way like they're like, we're mandating you because we're going to give you the choice of whether you want to go to college, you know, which they're not doing a great job of right now. But we're mandating you to be educated so you can make a choice up until college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's difficult without getting into specifics. Like, you know, I can argue, I can have a particular argument with you where I say, well, what are we looking to do? We're trying to maximize human flourishing or whatever. And we both have a very kind of case-selective attitude about this, right? You succeed by your own merits, you fail by your own merits. If somebody fails, it would be virtuous to provide them with the opportunity for success despite their previous failures, right? Charity is a good thing, right?
But the issue is like culturally, we deal with like people who want to be intellectually lazy.
Right.
So how do we deal with like the society, which tends to be like, you know, and in an anarcho world that works out really perfectly, but we're not dealing with the anarcho world, you know, people who want to be productive are productive, and the people who don't want to be productive aren't productive. Right. You know? And then we have charity to fill the gaps, you know?
Yeah. And then this is where my more radical notions start coming in. I mean, the more conservative, the less radical answer I have is these options, if you understand economics or whatever, are better at producing the results that we're looking for than what we currently have, right? Because the same person that says, oh, we need to fund universal education or universal healthcare or whatever, will at the same time say,
which is a great idea in theory, like everybody gets an education.
We need to fix it. Right? We need more money.
But only in the sense that you need somebody else to fill the gap for the lower end side.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And
immigrants would be great.
You're right about that too. But yeah, so the same people that say we need to have this universal right or universal privilege like healthcare, medicine, education, they also argue at the same time that the system is broken. They usually blame capitalism, but not always. But they'll say, you know, the education system is broken, we need Common Core to fix it, and we need to mandate that you do it and subsidize it with tax dollars. We're gonna say the same thing about healthcare. We're gonna say healthcare system's broken, and so we need to mandate that everybody get it, and we need to mandate that everybody pays for it, right? That kind of thing. So it's an easy kind of inroad if you're saying the system is broken and we need it. Then you say, well, let's look for an alternative system. And that's when you start talking about like insurance companies. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, but I just came out with a podcast episode. I could put it on the Slack channel. It's like 10 minutes long that talks about the insurance question we were talking about the other day. I don't know if I brought anything new to the discussion, but I did talk about it just kind of like in a monologue format. And it's the same sort of idea, right? If an insurance company is dealing with the well-being of a certain area, they're doing criminal prevention, right? So we're gonna have crime insurance. If your TV gets stolen, we will replace your TV. It's in our best interest then to prevent somebody from stealing your TV. So now we have a de facto police force that protects your TV. Then the next step of that is, well, education is directly correlated to a drop in crime rates. The higher educated an area is, the lower the crime rates, generally speaking, all other things being equal, you know, all the qualifications. So then the insurance company has a vested interest in incentivizing people in that area to have education. So now the premium that I'm paying to protect my TV from theft is going towards subsidizing the education of people that are underprivileged in my area, because maybe if they learn how to do math, maybe if they learn basic literacy, they can get a job and they won't have to steal my TV. And so now the insurance company is doing exactly what the government does. The difference is I'm voluntarily paying into that system. I get a benefit from the things I'm paying into it, and the underprivileged in my neighborhood get a benefit from it as well. It's also good PR to be like, look, we're a great, you know, philanthropist company. We're giving away our product for free, and so they may even give away, you know, free samples of education, right? If they're doing research, if they're incentivized to do research on how to best protect my television, and they're looking into the relationship between education and drop in crime rates, they may even do that as part of a research and development program where they pay for the entire education out of pocket just to uncouple economic forces from the educational forces that are at play on a scientific level. And it's just, the efficiency of the marketplace is amazing. You just have to be able to figure out how it works in order to be able to make that argument. And that's why most real anarcho-capitalists come into it from the angle of economics. Is first they learn economics, and then they realize that Austro-libertarianism is the inevitable result of understanding economics. Usually it's not the other way around, but you and I have both kind of come in through the back door, and I think that's because of the Catholic tradition of human rights.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I've got to call some people for my real job and eat dinner with my family and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm always ready to monologue about philosophy stuff. So if you ever want to have a conversation, we can do this.
It's a great convo.
I technically recorded this whole conversation just by default because that's the way the Google Hangouts is set up for me. I'm not planning on publishing it anywhere, but if you want a copy of it for whatever reason, I could send you one.
Yeah. No, you can use whatever part you want. I don't care.
Cool.
No.
Well, I hope I helped a little bit. If nothing else, this was a really fun conversation. So
yeah, no, I agree.
Cool.
So I'll be visiting Denver, not in the near